So I'm going to hand over to Harriet. Harriet, what's in the news? Is it depressing? Is it going to cheer us up on a Wednesday?
Well, the first one isn't. So we have the next slide. The first one is not going to cheer us up. So this was a report done by the Chartered Management Institute. CMI, Chartered Management Institute. And it found that roughly a third of male managers are actively blocking gender balance efforts in the UK, which I found incredibly depressing. Even more depressing than that, 13% of female managers actively blocking gender balance efforts. The feeling was that really they were both unnecessary and ineffectual, so why would we bother doing them? And I suspect this is a little bit of what in media we would call compassion fatigue, which is when we've heard so much about a topic, we kind of become a bit deaf to it. And also, I think sometimes it's just that we don't care about things unless they directly affect us. But if perhaps you feel like one of the male members of your team is less involved and less enthusiastic about gender balance efforts than you thought perhaps they should be, you're not imagining it, they're in that third. And then I've got a couple of big reports that came out in the last month or so. If you are an organisation that has released a big women in work type report, and I have not put it on these slides, I'm so sorry. It means I'm not on your mailing list or your SEO isn't good enough. So you can think about how you change one of those two things. But first up was PwC Women in Work Index 2022. Actually, there's no good news in these ones. So if this is hard for you, I'm sorry, I try. But PwC Women in Work Index 2022 looked at the impact, particularly of the last 2 years, on women's employability and how it has impacted the numbers of women in the workplace. And in short, the last 2 years has been harder for women than for men. I think we knew that when it comes to employment, but it actually looks at the numbers and we see that women have left the workforce in much higher numbers than men over the last 2 years. Why is that? I don't know, maybe we all liked staying at home too much, maybe we enjoyed it, or maybe we just couldn't balance everything all at once. But some interesting numbers to look at in there. And then the Deloitte Women at Work 2022 actually looks at this from a slightly different point of view. This report really goes into lots of details about burnout. We were saying just before the session, actually, that we were all kind of feeling like our resilience this year is a bit lower than it should be. A friend of mine described 2022 yesterday as the hangover year. So we're all feeling a bit too hungover right now to actually deal with it, not for happy reasons. So the Deloitte report looks at the levels of burnout women are experiencing and the causes of that. So it's really worth having a look at, particularly if you know that that's going on in your team and you're trying to explain to perhaps senior leadership why you might want to be thinking about what are some options that we can bring into the organisation to support people. There's some great stats to kind of explain what's going on there. The next story actually refers to something that the government has done that I think is a good thing. I had to read it several times to be sure of that. It feels a little uncomfortable me saying it, but there we go. They have set up a menopause and miscarriage fund, and it's specifically for charitable organisations. So possibly not for people on this call, but perhaps you know people that could benefit from it. But charitable organisations can access this fund to essentially provide financial support for women going through menopause and miscarriage at work, and for training, support, development opportunities within the workplace to help women. I think it's a nice thing. Women's work often goes unrewarded. This is what I like to call the no shit Sherlock story of the week. And this is a big research piece. You might have seen there are lots of variations of this story across the news. A group of women have done some research into the amount of extra work that women do at work. The things like buying the birthday cake, listening to people when they're having a bad day, taking time to organise who's going to be on holiday and who's going to cover when somebody is on holiday. All of that kind of extra caring, emotional labour that women do at work. And it looked at not only the kind of impact that has on women, but also the impact it has on our career. So how much of our time is being taken away from the work that we need to do in order to do this kind of actually what they call in the next story, office housework. So again, this is the club that teaches women to say no. This is about the women who actually did the research. It's quite worth having a read of and just learning a bit more about them and their experiences, because I think it will resonate with everyone. At one point in my last office, I actually took a stand and refused to ever buy a birthday card ever again. And I ended up in a standoff with my kind of male counterpart, who had a team member. It was her birthday. We bought cards for everybody's birthday. And because I had said no to do it, he was like, well, I'm not doing it, so she's not going to get one. And we ended up in a standoff about it. That has to end. Finally, how women can recognize male allies in the workplace. This is Harvard Business Review, I think. So Harvard Business Review looked at essentially what are the qualities that people show when they're being an active ally. So not just when they're saying they're being an ally. I think Lena and I are going to talk about this a little bit more, but when they're being an active ally. So what are the things that we do when we are active? And things like that are actually calling things out. So you hear them challenge stuff. You hear them actively promote other people. So people are just telling you this, but you're not hearing it. That's not active allyship. Also, for all of us to think about that, are we doing that stuff, not just behind closed doors, but actively in front of other people as well? Half of older women say they will have to work past retirement age. This is about essentially the pension scandal for women, which is because of the career breaks that women tend to take due to generally children. We tend to have less in our pension funds than men do, so we will have to be working for longer. I would love to know who the half of older women are who won't have to work past retirement age, and what is their secret? How can I have it? But it's worth looking at this, partly because there are things going on, and I don't know all details. Martin Lewis probably knows the details, allowing women to claim for some of that gap at the moment. So if you think you might be eligible for that, it is worth looking at. And also because it's really important that we're all thinking about what we're doing in terms of our pension and how we can help other women in our organisations think about that as well. Menopausal women lack basic support. This is a report that came out a couple of months ago now, which looks at essentially the fact that basically no organisations have any type of official support in place for women when they are going through the menopause. And when I say official, I mean in terms of things like policies, HR policies, management policies, clear practice for managers and how to support those women, clear practice for those women in what they are allowed to do, how they are allowed to talk about it, what support they are able to access. So I really am thrilled that we are seeing a kind of an open discussion happening about the menopause in organisations at the moment. I think it's so important, but it's also so important to get that stuff formalised, written down, part of your workplace policies, so people know what they can and cannot access. Absence of employment bill leaves organisations in limbo. So you might know this a few years ago. The government announced it was creating an employment bill that would be part of the Queen's speech last month. And it was going to be amazing. It was going to guarantee the right to flexible work. It was going to guarantee the support for women going through pregnancy or just after childbirth. Lots of good stuff for women was going to be in that employment bill. And then suddenly it wasn't, because the employment bill just kind of evaporated. It's really worth, if you can, go and have a look at some of these things that we're going to be.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Lovely. Mute one sec.
Thank you.
Oh,
From yesterday.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if you can go and check out the employment bill and see what was going to be in there, and maybe you want to lobby your MP about potentially bringing it back, because there was so much good stuff. And then finally, to end on a lighter note, to go with the concept of mansplaining and manspreading, we now have heap eating. And heap eating is the official name that is now given to that wonderful behaviour of when you say something in a meeting, nobody responds to it. It's like you've just spoken into a vacuum. You're like, have I lost my voice? Is this all just a simulation? And then 5 minutes later, a man says exactly the same thing and everyone goes, oh my God, great idea. It looks at why it exists and how we can counteract it. Interesting thing that's happened to me over the last 2 years is that I now find it really difficult to listen to men talking. I'm not saying I found it easy to begin with, but I found it really difficult to listen to men talking. So a few years ago, there was some research done that said men found it difficult to hear women in meetings because our voices are too high pitched and their ears are not attuned for them. And I mocked that and thought it was ridiculous. But it turns out my ears are now not attuned to anyone whose voice is too low pitched. And so I have to work harder on it. I don't think I'm missing much. That is all the news for this quarter. Thank you so much for listening to me as ever. And I think somebody put in the chat, are we going to share slides? Yes, and they should all be linked in the slides so you can go and see the stories yourself as well.